Hi, good evening, everyone. I'm doing a quick video tonight about Douglas Murray and these various other talking heads who are kind of obviously inflating tensions between opposing groups in the sort of Israel-Palestine conflict. And I think that's being done quite cynically and quite deliberately. And I wanted to run through that so people don't fall into the trap of getting riled up and aggravated, and in a worst case scenario, getting involved in physical violence, which seems to be implicitly or almost explicitly what these talking heads are calling for. So, just a couple of days ago, this is one of the sort of semi calls to violence from Douglas Murray, where he is calling everyone that's going on this proposed Palestine march a Hamas supporter, which clearly is intended as a smear because there may well be, and I suspect the vast majority of people are there because they would like to see an end to the war, which is a pretty reasonable thing to wish for, and that doesn't mean you support terrorists. So this first part is a smear. The second part about this being on Remembrance Day is slightly confusing because the 2 minute silence is on the 11th of November, and neither of the planned marches begins until after 11 a.m. on the 11th of November. So they won't be interfering with Remembrance Day. Then the 11 o'clock in the morning silence. The actual service, slightly confusingly, is on the Sunday, which is the 12th. And of course, the march is planned for the 11th. So there should be no interaction. Here he's talking with great confidence about desecrating the Cenotaph. I don't know if there are any such plans, but really, the thing that I wanted to say is when he says Britain must come out and stop these barbarians, he is inciting violence there because this is clearly a job for the police to do. Encouraging others to go down there and get in the way of this and end up in physical violence potentially is not right. And he is based in New York. I think there's absolutely zero chance of him having any intention of going down there and getting involved in any kind of melee. He's sending you and I down to do that based on our patriotism. So this is quite cynical, and my actual assumption is that he actually wants to see scenes of violence because that will give him sort of collateral, marketing collateral to feed the war machine, feed the hate, and make it more likely that the UK then gets dragged into this conflict even further than it already is. So, what we're seeing here again is classical emotional manipulation, divide and conquer. The entire sort of government state media complex has switched over in the space of a few days from Ukraine to Israel, and they're pushing the same divisive rhetoric that this situation, which is very complicated, been going back thousands of years, um, can and should be pushed into simple slogans like "I stand with Israel" or "From the river to the sea" or something like that, which is, it's ludicrous to expect something as complicated as the history of Gaza to fit into a three-word slogan, which all the UK government ministers are pushing right now. And we did quite a long piece on the website. You can see here Gaza providing perspective, where we trace, the current conflict has been, I mean, you can trace it fairly accurately from 1991 onwards. So there's been a lot of very bad history on both sides. This is, as the Russians say, a stick with two ends. So when you force something into a single sort of 3 or 4 word slogan, you're denying the other side any of their grievances. You just refuse to listen. You say, no, this is black and white. We stand with A or we stand with B. And in the process, you completely ignore the other side, which is, of course, going to be pretty inflammatory after a while. So rather than adopting a reasonable position saying, we denounce this, but at the same time, we appreciate that there is some background here. Rather than doing that, we're getting these 3 or 4 word slogans, which are infuriating, and I'm pretty certain they're deliberately infuriating. Now, Douglas Murray has been a warmonger for a long time. I don't think he makes a big secret of this. Even in 2006, he was happy to defend the completely indefensible war against Iraq that resulted in somewhere about a third of a million civilians being killed. He's still writing that, something's misunderstood, but he's still supportive of the war against Iraq. And he hangs out in this Henry Jackson society, which is just stuffed full of warmongers. So these guys believe in the sort of Brzezinski, Wolfowitz, ultra aggressive US foreign policy and desire for hegemony. This is really their worldview, and it makes them aggressive and constantly pushing for war, and at the same time, obviously, avoiding de-escalation and any kind of negotiations on peace. And we've seen them over and over, moving seamlessly from one conflict to the next, pushing more war, the so-called forever wars. So the next point is that Douglas Murray correctly pointed out in his book, of course, the great dangers of having large inflows of people coming into Europe and the UK who remain unassimilated. And, that is definitely a problem that we have in the West now. But if you actually look at what's the origin of those refugees, if you look at this list, which is the top 10, it's from the Pew Research Center on data from 2010 to 2016. The top three sources of refugees were all from countries who were invaded or attacked as a result of these neocon wars. So, and then when you look at the percentage of Muslim refugees, 91, 100%, 92%. So, this is incredibly two-faced of Murray to, on the one hand, be advocating for more wars, and at the same time be bemoaning the fact that we're being inundated with refugees and migrants coming in from those countries that have been attacked. And that's a very two-faced position, but it is what it is. You have to be aware of it, that this is very hypocritical. Now, the real reason I also think we shouldn't listen to Mr. Murray at all is when we had a massive attack from the state on the liberties of the UK citizens in 2020 and 2021, including lockdowns, vaccine mandates, vaccine passports, vilification of the unvaccinated. Uh, you heard really literally nothing from Murray from all those 2 years. Now, there were occasional tweets and the odd interview, but it's really nothing. Now, if he genuinely cared about liberal democracy and personal liberty in the UK, which is what he claims he does, because those are the basis on which he's advocating for all kinds of wars all around the world, because we're rolling out this great democracy and individual liberties and human rights. But when those were under massive attack in the UK, this guy's nowhere to be seen. And this is something noticed by Peter Hitchens, asking Douglas Murray to get off the fence. And, there was some kind of feeble excuse that I can't work out the medical proportionate. Is this a proportionate or response or not? Now, that's not credible from a guy who's done the amount of work and research and book writing and graduated from Oxford. He just sat this out essentially. Now, that to me represents his real commitment to freedom and liberty, because this was the time to stand up and be counted, and he did nothing. So I don't believe his chest beating love of individual liberties that he claims to have, because when it counted, he just wasn't there. And then his attack on those marches. So I looked at one march, which is "Stop the War on Gaza," or "Stop the War," and here it is: "Stop the War on Gaza" is the placard here. But they've been quite clear that, look, we're not going anywhere near the Cenotaph. It's going to start at 12:45, hours after the 2 minute silence at 11 a.m. So, they're again being smeared by Murray, at least this march. Now, the other march, which is the Palestine march, starts at 12. So even then, it's not at 11. And I think the worst part of his smearing is characterizing everybody there as Hamas supporters, which is, of course, a complete lie. And we did a small poll on Twitter. Okay, it's only a couple of hundred people, but I think it's reflective of what a lot of people think, that people, their humanity means they are opposed to Hamas. Of course, they're opposed to Hamas. What Hamas did, they should be caught and punished. And if it means a war with Hamas terrorism, so be it. But they're also, at the same time, of course, opposed to bombing civilians. And we've seen over and over those pictures of buildings being blown up. There's no way you can really target and differentiate military targets from civilian targets in a dense urban area like those videos we're seeing. It's just not possible. So people are opposed to both of those things, and that's really what came out of this survey. That really 80% of people are opposed to both of those things because that's a human position to take, to be against the loss of life. So smearing everybody that's at either of those marches as supporters of Hamas is exactly that. It's a smear. But I think what I really wanted to say in this video is, it feels like not just the regular warmongering to keep tensions high to justify more money, more weapons, more military involvement, but it feels like they're engineering a kind of 6th of January fight of some description, which will then generate visual collateral and stills and videos for them to keep feeding the war machine. I think a lot of this is very artificial, raising the temperature up until that 11th of November date. And I think they actually want to create this clash, and they want to get some video picture material out of that to feed the sort of war machine, essentially. So I'd be very careful about that. Um, and I think that's all I wanted to say in this video. I'm glad to see on social media a lot of people do seem to be aware of those things, that, Mr. Murray was nowhere to be seen when our own democracy was under attack and our own liberties were being taken away. That's been duly noted. And I think people are very much more careful now about warmongering and more aware of what it looks like and who's doing it, and therefore less likely to fall for it. So, again, if anybody really takes the bait and goes down to the Cenotaph and stands up for the things Murray's calling for, be sure he'll be nowhere near there. He'll be sitting in a penthouse in New York somewhere. So just don't fall for it. Is the main message. Thanks. Bye.